Welcome to Terrorific, the place where it's perpetually spooky season. I'm your host, Brandon O, and we are continuing our quest to crown the number one most diabolical trap in the Saw franchise. To recap our current standings, the winner from Saw 2, the Death Mask, was defeated by the winner from Saw 3, the Rack. And in this episode, I'll be combing through all the traps from Saw 4, picking one to go up against the Rack to determine which one will continue to advance in our competition. But first, a couple of housekeeping items to address. Number one, hope you had a happy Thanksgiving. My family and I took a trip down to East Texas, where we stayed at a lake house in the woods, which during the day was beautiful and quite scenic. But at night, well, considering the kind of movies that I like to watch, no good things happen at night at lake houses in the woods. So, paranoia excluded. Great trip overall. Item number 2 is that the show is now on TikTok. So that handle is at Terrorific Pod. And it's only been a week, but I've already been flagged for violating the community guidelines. If you're already following the show on IG or YouTube, you may have seen the pig soup snippet that was uploaded. No issues on either one of those platforms, but apparently TikTok does not want Terrorific to be great, but that's okay. We will persevere. All right, so now let's get into Saw 4. The film was released back in 2007, making it the fourth consecutive year that a Saw film was released. Now, one film per year is a crazy pace to sustain, so we start to see a little bit of attrition set in. Darren Lynn Bousman did return to direct for the third film in a row. However, for the first time in the series, Lee Whannell was not a writer on the film, nor was James Wan. They did, however, serve as executive producers. Now, an executive at Twisted Pictures discovered a script written by Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan titled The Midnight Man and thought that it could serve as the basis for a prequel for Jigsaw's origin story. But ultimately, the producers decided against it. However, they did like the script enough to sign on Melton and Dunstan to write the story for a trilogy to span Saws 4 through 6. Additionally, for Saw 4, they brought in a man named Thomas Fenton to help write the story as well. The original Midnight Man script was reworked into its own film called The Collector, and that was released in 2009. Saw 4 was given a budget of $10 million, and it went on to gross worldwide approximately $139 million, which is an ROI just shy of 1,400%. And while that amount remains high, it does continue yet again the trend we've been seeing throughout the series, film over film, of the ROI decreasing, with Saw 1 having an ROI over 10,000%, Saw 2 at 3,700%, and Saw 3 at around 1,700%. On Rotten Tomatoes, Saw 4 currently holds a score of 18% from critics and 62% from audiences, with the critics' consensus reading, quote, Saw 4 is more disturbing than compelling, with material already seen in prior installments. Now, there's only so much new material that you can have in the sequel to a sequel, but I get it. And this consensus, along with the trend of the decreasing ROI, does seem to suggest that there is an amount of torture porn fatigue that has started to set in with viewers. But when you're still making an ROI of 1,400%, it's kind of hard to justify not pumping out a new movie every single year when you're getting such a crazy return. Cash is king at the end of the day. But now for the fun stuff. Round 4 of the Trap Olympics. Consider this your spoiler alert. By my count, Saw 4 provides us with 7 traps, so kicking us off at number 7, we have the Billy the Puppet Trap. By now, you know how I feel about traps that are avoidable. I have very little sympathy for people acting less than intelligently in situations that only require a very basic, minimal level of common sense in order to survive and or prevent bodily harm from coming to themselves. And in this situation, we have a very clear example of acting less than intelligently in a situation that required very little common sense. And so we have a new character, Special Agent Lindsay Perez of the FBI. She, along with her partner, Special Agent Peter Strom, have been tasked with investigating the Jigsaw killer. They had been working with Detective Carey, who, as we know, fell victim to the Ribcage Ripper, or as I recently learned, apparently it's called the Angel Trap. Fell victim to that in Saw 3, and so they came to investigate why their liaison has gone dark and find her dead. The plot progresses, and eventually we find Agents Perez and Strom in a room with Billy the Puppet. A recording plays informing Perez that Strom will soon kill an innocent man and she must do what she can to stop him, like her next step is critical or something along those lines. At this point, the doll begins to whisper something, and upon hearing this, Agent Perez takes a step, wink wink, nudge nudge, closer to the puppet, and eventually she's face to face with it. And considering that this puppet is the known calling card of Jigsaw, who has an MO of utilizing countless booby traps to torture and or maim numerous people, as the special agent tasked with investigating his crimes, you would think Agent Perez would be privy to this information. Yet, she seems surprised when this puppet then blows up in her face, littering it with shrapnel and putting her in critical condition. So, yeah, get well soon, Agent Perez, but that trap was wholly avoidable and overall pretty tame compared to other traps we've seen in the Saw franchise to this point, so comes in at number 7. At number 6, we have a little bit of a combo platter because these traps are all codependent on one another. So we have a mix of Riggs' hero test, Matthews' ice blocks, and Hoffman's electro chair. So Lieutenant Rigg is the SWAT commander who first appeared in Saw 2. He had a brief appearance as well in Saw 3, but now in Saw 4 he's the main protagonist. So he gets incapacitated in his apartment, and when he wakes up he finds himself thrust into one of Jigsaw's games. Now, at this point the recording kicks on and Jigsaw explains that Rigg has developed an unhealthy obsession with being the hero and trying to save the victim. And he shows him footage of Detectives Hoffman and Matthews. Up until this point, it has not been confirmed that Matthews was still alive, so obviously Rigg feels some kind of way about this. But Jigsaw goes on to say that he must resist that urge to save the victim for 90 minutes. If he does this, then he'll be victorious and he'll be able to save Matthews and Hoffman as well as himself. But before then, there's a series of other tests that he must complete, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, as the film progresses, we get more shots of Matthews and Hoffman and kind of their setup. So they're on this scale type thing together. On one end, we have Matthews who's standing on an ice block with heat lamps around it. And he also has a noose around his neck. If he steps off this block or if it melts, then the scales will tip, dipping Hoffman, who has been restrained to a chair, into a puddle of water that has been electrified. So he will be electrocuted and die. And Matthews will obviously be hanged to death. But a little icing on the cake is that also above Matthews are 2 other ice blocks attached to these pendulum-like devices. And there's a tension wire leading from them to the handle of the door to the room. So if the door is open before the 90 minutes expires, these ice blocks will come crashing down and demolish Matthews' head, as well as sending Hoffman into the water. And of course, Lieutenant Rigg, being the hero that he is, comes barreling through the door with 1 second to spare, causing the blocks to come wreck Matthews' head, sending Hoffman into the water. But plot twist, he does not get electrocuted because he's Jigsaw's other apprentice. And boy, talk about an obvious plot twist. Even Stevie Wonder saw this one coming. But I digress. I can understand Rigg having this uncontrollable desire of wanting to save his friend after obsessing over the past 6 months of whether he was still alive or not. To finally get that confirmation, it makes sense that he just had to spring into action. However, this is yet another example of Jigsaw being relatively forthcoming and honest. He said that if Rig could just resist for 90 minutes, as tough of an ask as that may be, that everyone would be okay. And that would have been the case. So overall, pretty low on the scale of diabolicality. But it does get a slight bump over the Billy the Puppet trap because there is that added pressure of trying to save your friend. And now for the top 5. At number 5, we have the first trap that we see in the movie that I'll call See No Evil, Speak No Evil. We've got 2 dudes who wake up in a mausoleum. One has his eyes sewn shut, the other has his mouth sewn shut, and they both have a collar around their necks and they are chained together. But first, this chain feeds through some machinery in the middle of the room. And as they kind of panic and rummage around, it causes the machinery to activate and starts to slowly pull them towards it, where they will be crushed and or strangulated to death. The dude with his eyes sewn shut starts to freak out. He hears this machinery start up. He hears the man across the room moving around, mumbling, because obviously he can't speak. So he starts to panic even more. He finds an axe on the ground and throws it at the dude, finds a meat hook at the ground, starts swinging it around. And at this point, the dude with his mouth sewn shut notices that on the back of the collar of the man with his eyes sewn shut is a key. So he begins to approach, trying to get this key. They get into a fight, stab each other, cut each other, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, dude with his mouth sewn shut has to kill the other dude, gets the key, and earns his freedom. Now, bloodshed wasn't as avoidable in this one as it was in our first 2 traps, but they both could have made it out of this alive. I mean, the dude with his mouth sewn shut had an axe flung at him. Theoretically, he could have picked it up off the ground and used it to cut the stitching on his mouth so he could speak to old boy and tell him like, hey, let me just explain the situation to you right now. We're both kind of in the same boat. But instead, he waited until after he killed the dude in order to force his mouth open, which makes absolutely no sense. At that point, he's already eliminated the immediate threat to his life. So why not just take a casual stroll to the doctor or the hospital to have them use their medical tools to remove the stitching in a way that causes you minimal to no pain? But what do I know? At number 4, we have the trap that I'll refer to as the knife gate. Through a series of flashbacks, Saw 4 offers us some additional insight into Jigsaw's past and his villain origin story. So he used to be married to a woman named Jill Tuck. Jill ran this clinic for drug addiction patients. And one night, as she's about to leave the clinic, one of those patients comes to the door, says he forgot his jacket in there. So she turns around, goes to get the jacket. As she's coming back to the door, he kind of like forces his way in, threatens her with a knife, I think. It's like, hey, let me in there. I'm trying to rob this shit. And she's like, oh, gosh. Okay, fine. So she lets him into the clinic and he's like, hey, don't move. And he makes his way deeper into the clinic. Now, this entire time, Jigsaw is sitting outside the clinic in his car waiting for Jill to come out so they can drive home together. And for some strange reason, Jill does not run to Jigsaw. She stays inside the clinic because old dude told her, hey, don't move. And I guess she's, paralyzed with fear or whatever. But anyway, as he's done getting whatever he was trying to get, he rushes out of the door, and Jill, who's pregnant at the time, gets pinned behind the door. And as it makes contact with her stomach, the trauma eventually causes her to miscarry. And this is where Jigsaw begins to spiral. So he's diagnosed with his cancer not long after this. He has his suicide attempt, survives it, and that's when he's reborn with this purpose of teaching people the meaning of life. And his first test subject is, of course, this man who killed his unborn child. So Jigsaw kidnaps this man and takes him to this workshop, and he has him restrained to a chair. His wrists are either slashed or punctured by the restraints, and his ankles are restrained as well. And over the top of his head, Jigsaw places this kind of enclosure of knives, and this man must push his face through this gate of knives in order to hit a release lever that will then cause the chair to break and he'll be free. He manages to do so with, relative superficial wounds. But after he's free, he's of course upset. So he lunges at Jigsaw, who deftly steps to the side, causing this man to spill into a collection of barbed or razor wire. At this point, Jigsaw looks at him and takes out his notepad to start scribbling some things down. And of course, this likely is what led to the trap of the barbed wire jungle, our winner from the first Saw as the most diabolical trap in that film. Now, the physical toll of this trap is relatively low compared to other ones that we've seen in the series so far, but the emotional stakes involved with it, the personal aspect of it, make it more diabolical. It meant more to Jigsaw, therefore it has to have a higher ranking. For our bronze medalist, coming in at number 3, we have the human kebab. During one of the many flashbacks found in this movie, we see a young Rig on one of his early cases. He's at a school investigating a girl who's showing up with these mysterious bruises, and it's intimated that she's been abused by her father. And her mother appears to be aware, but is unable to do anything because she is being abused by her husband as well. As we cut back to the present, we find Rig still on his hero's test from Jigsaw. He comes back to this school, enters a classroom where he sees this husband and wife restrained back to back with various rods coming out of both of their bodies. They've been skewered, but only the husband has been hit in vital arteries. The wife, hers are just essentially flesh wounds. But the catch is, she must remove these rods herself. This is part of her personal game. And by the time Rig shows up, the wife has removed all but one of these rods, so the husband has since bled out. And she wakes up asking for help, but Rig's like, no, you gotta help yourself. I'm moving on. But man, asking a battered wife to have to kill her husband in order to save herself when she has up until this point shown an extreme reticence towards escaping his clutches, that's a lot to ask. And on top of that, she has to painfully remove these items from her body one by one in order to accomplish that as well. That is quite diabolical. But from an overall pain perspective, the human kebab is almost like a walk on the beach compared to our top 2 traps. Well, at least from the wife's perspective. From the husband's perspective, I'm sure it was a little bit more painful, but sorry, not sorry. You're a child and wife beater, so we don't really care about you. In our number 2 spot, we have the Scalper. The Scalper is the first trap that Rig comes across on the journey of his hero's test. So after he stumbles out of his bathroom, he comes into his living room, sees a person restrained to a chair, and this person is wearing a pig mask, the pig mask that Jigsaw and Amanda and other accomplices have worn while they kidnap people. So we see the continuance of the pig motif that I touched on last episode, and I'll expand upon it a little bit more in a bit. But as Rig removes this pig mask, he sees a woman, an unknown woman below it, but there's pictures hung up in this room that seem to showcase her committing some sort of crime. Now, at this point, the recording kicks on and Jigsaw explains that Rig just needs to walk away because what he sees in front of him is a victim, but in reality, she is a criminal undeserving of the life she leads. Turns out she's a sex trafficker, making a living selling young girls. Disgusting. But Rig, being the all-around good guy that he is, can't resist the urge to save this woman, so as he springs into action, it ends up kicking off the machinery attached to this chair and a series of gears that this woman's hair has been fed through begin to turn, slowly threatening to scalp her after a certain amount of time. Rig frantically searches around the apartment for something to cut this woman's hair with. As he goes to the kitchen to get a knife, he finds a note left by Jigsaw, basically saying, haha, no knives here, I knew you'd come here, you're a sucker. And so this slight delay causes the woman's scalp to begin to rip off. And it's gross. But eventually he goes back there, he shoots the gears, stopping the machine, and he's able to free the woman. But unbeknownst to Rig, this woman is involved in her own game with Jigsaw. So she's been informed that a police officer will attempt to save her, and if he's successful, he will use the photographs hanging around the room as evidence of her crimes to convict her and lock her away. So she must kill him in order to protect herself. So she crawls along the ground and finds a knife that's been hidden in the house, takes it, and tries to stab Rig with it. But because Rig is our protagonist, he has plot armor, so he was able to evade this woman and incapacitate her to continue his hero's journey. But, yeah, from a trap perspective, being awake and aware as you are slowly and partially scalped, what the fuck? That sounds horrible. And honestly, I was very close to putting this as the number one most diabolical trap in Saw 4. But number one just had a little bit of extra seasoning on it that we just had to go with it. So our number one most diabolical trap in Saw 4, the trap that will take on the winner from Saw 3, the Rack, is a trap that I will refer to as the 2x4. Rig's journey to find Detective Matthews brings him to a motel. As he goes into this motel room, he sees a box sitting on the bed. Inside this box is a pig mask, a tape recorder with a tape in there, and a picture of the motel's clerk inside. So as Rig presses play on this tape, he's informed that he'll need to restrain the clerk and make him participate in his own game in order to find his own salvation. And since Rig did not actually check into this motel, he just used the key provided to him by Jigsaw to go directly to the room. The clerk comes up to see what the hell is going on, and Rig dons this pig mask and forces the clerk into the adjoining room at gunpoint. In this room, there's a bed with restraints, and there's pictures all over the room of bloodied, bound, and gagged women. And at this point, we learn that this clerk is a serial rapist. What a piece of shit. And Rig, being the all-around good guy that he is, also comes to the realization that this dude is a piece of shit, so he does restrain him to the bed. He finds and plays another recording from Jigsaw in the room, and Jigsaw explains that the clerk must make a choice between his body that he's used to perpetrate these heinous crimes and his eyes, which he's used to relive and rewatch these heinous crimes. So there's an individual restraint for each ankle and each wrist. Plus, the clerk's head has been clamped between these two kind of blocks. And Rig hands him these buttons to press. And if he does so, a pickaxe will lower into each one of his eyes, gouging it out. And if he's able to do that within 1 minute, then he'll be released. And so the clock starts, and he does manage to press one of the buttons, taking out one of his eyes, but time expires before he can press the second one. So he is then dismembered. He's essentially drawn and quartered and lands in multiple pieces on the floor. And it was pretty fucking gross. Pretty fucking gross, if I'm being honest with you. But beyond that, this is the only trap in the movie where lifelong alterations to one's body were guaranteed. This man was guaranteed to be at least maimed. Everyone else at least had a chance to escape unharmed or with relatively minor or superficial wounds. But this dude was fucked. He was either going to be a human football or he was going to be blind. Absolutely fucked. Now, of course, the factors I use to determine what makes a trap diabolical vary, and it's fluid, right? But if I had to pick one criterion, I would say that being absolutely fucked would probably be that criterion. But when you compare the 2x4 to the rack, I think the criterion of being absolutely fucked is met by both of these traps. So now we need a tiebreaker. The first tiebreaker I'm going with is pain level. And having each one of your limbs slowly twisted until they shatter, splinter, fracture, versus gouging out one eye at a time, or having all 4 of your limbs simultaneously ripped off. I'm going to say that the pain is a wash here. I'm not sure how you would differentiate between those two, so we're going to just say that they're equal. Next criterion I'll use for the tiebreaker is duration. How long are you in this agony? So with the rack, it's a slow twist. So I think that's going to take a while. And with the 2x4, you only have a minute total to put your eyes out. So that automatically seems shorter. And if that time expires and all 4 limbs get ripped off, it's happening together instantaneously. So based on that, I think we're going to have to go with the rack as the winner here. For the very first time, we have a trap that has won multiple rounds in the competition. So the rack will advance to take on the winner from Saw 5 next episode. And we'll see how long the momentum can keep going. It might go all the way. But to wrap things up, as I mentioned previously, Saw 4 expands upon the pig motif that's been prevalent throughout the entire series thus far. There's a scene where Dr. Tuck is being questioned by the FBI about her relationship with Jigsaw, and while speaking about her pregnancy, she mentions that it was meticulously planned because Jigsaw meticulously plans everything. And later on, we get another scene where we see Jigsaw stalking Cecil, the man who caused Jill to have her miscarriage. He's stalking him through a Chinese New Year parade, and we see that it is now the year of the pig. And in Chinese culture, the year of the pig symbolizes wealth, good fortune, and good luck. People born in the year of the pig are said to be kind and gentle, realistic and pragmatic, easygoing, and hardworking. So now this adds a new element to why Jigsaw wears these pig masks during his abductions. The mask becomes an outward expression of grief as well as a reminder of why Jigsaw is doing all of this in the first place. And the fact that the mask is always dirty and grimy can be interpreted as Jigsaw deliberately perverting what the pig is supposed to symbolize in Chinese culture. There is no good luck and no good fortune from his point of view. There's only loss and despair. And with that, I bid you adieu. Next episode, we'll get into Saw 5. And in the meantime, remember to always keep it spooky.